Leela Kane stumbled through the wreckage of what had once been a thriving metropolis. The once bustling streets were now littered with the debris of a world conquered. Towers of glass and steel lay shattered, their skeletal remains clawing at the sky like the hands of the dead. The air was thick with ash, the remnants of burning ruins, and the haunting smell of decay. A low hum echoed in the distance, the sound of alien engines scouting for stragglers, those who had survived the initial assault. Leela wasn't sure how she had made it this far. She wasn't sure how many days had passed since the attack began. The last thing she remembered clearly was the desperate final stand she and her platoon had made, only to be overrun by alien forces. The war had been long, but this had felt like the end. Until the fire. It had started small, just a flicker, a spark from a charred piece of metal. Leela had been desperate, on the brink of collapse, when she instinctively reached out to push the fire away. But instead of retreating, the flame responded to her touch. Growing, swirling, alive in a way that defied logic. It was as if it had been waiting for her. In that moment, something in her had changed. She could feel the power pulsing inside her veins, the warmth spreading through her limbs like a living current. The fire was hers to command, and it responded to her every thought, every movement. But that wasn't the most terrifying part. The fire wasn't just a weapon. It was an extension of her. She felt a deep, almost primal connection to it, a connection that made her both stronger and more vulnerable than ever before. Leela took a hesitant step forward, her boots crunching against the charred ground. She flexed her fingers, and the fire obeyed, leaping from her hand and lashing out, forming a blade of molten flame. It hummed with a raw, dangerous energy that made her heart race. She didn't know how this was possible, or why it was happening now, but one thing was clear. The power coursing through her wasn't a gift. It was a weapon, a force that could either save humanity or destroy it. "Hello," she called out, her voice hoarse from days of silence. She wasn't sure if anyone was even left. The aliens had decimated entire cities, wiping out entire populations with ruthless precision. Yet, in the back of her mind, a flicker of hope refused to die. A rustle in the shadows caught her attention, and she whipped around, her fire blade igniting with a hiss. Her eyes narrowed, scanning the ruins. She wasn't alone. From behind a pile of debris, a figure emerged, a woman, dressed in the tattered remains of a soldier's uniform, her hair matted with dirt and blood. Her face was gaunt, hollow from hunger, but there was a fire in her eyes, a spark that Leela recognized instantly. "You?" Leela breathed, lowering the blade. "I thought. You thought everyone was gone." The woman's voice was rough but steady. "I thought that too, until I found this." She held up a hand, and to Leela's shock, a swirl of flame danced above her palm. It flickered and swirled, a perfect match to the fire Leela had just discovered within herself. They were the same. "The fire's not just for us," the woman said. "It's a message. We're not alone." The words hit Leela like a shockwave. If others had these powers too, maybe they had a chance. Maybe Earth wasn't finished. Maybe humanity wasn't done yet. But as the wind shifted, carrying the stench of alien machinery, a loud rumble broke the stillness. The alien ships were near. The fight was coming. And now, with the fire burning inside her, Leela Kane was ready to meet it head-on. "Let's make sure they never forget who we are," Leela said, her voice steady with the weight of something new, something fierce. The woman nodded, her own flame growing stronger in response. Together, they turned toward the horizon, where the alien war machines would soon land, unaware that the heralds of fire were about to rise from the ashes of humanity's defeat. The wind howled across the ruins, carrying the faint sounds of distant explosions as the alien warships hovered overhead. Lila's eyes narrowed as she felt the heat of the fire still pulsing beneath her skin. The flames were no longer just a tool. They were her, but she knew they could be dangerous. A flash of memory from the last battle burned bright in her mind, the flames consuming her platoon, the fire spiraling out of control, the screams of her comrades as they were turned to ash. "Focus," she muttered to herself, pushing the memory away. The fire might be unpredictable, but it was humanity's last hope, and she had to learn to wield it without losing herself in the process. The woman beside her, who hadn't yet introduced herself, was watching her closely. Her eyes flicked from the swirling fire in Leela's hands to the horizon, where more alien ships were starting to descend from the dark sky. They weren't alone anymore. "Leela Kane, right?" the woman asked, breaking the tense silence. Leela looked up, surprised at the recognition. "How do you know my name?" "I've heard the stories." The woman's voice was steady, and there was something fierce in her gaze. "The last stand at Eclipse City. Your platoon fought till the end. I was there, but not with you. I was elsewhere." The admission hit Leela harder than expected. A flash of guilt surged through her chest, but she held it down. "I thought I was the last one alive." "You're not. There are more of us, more like you. Like me." Leela's stomach tightened. "You mean you have the fire too?" The woman nodded. "I don't know where it came from, but it's inside me. I've seen it in others as well. Scattered survivors, all over this ruined planet. It's why I came looking for you. They're waiting for you, Leela." Leela's heart skipped a beat. A team. A movement. The idea of finding others with the same power felt like a spark of hope in the midst of endless darkness. But that spark was small, and the alien forces were closing in fast. "How many?" Leela asked, gripping her molten blade tightly. "Enough to fight back," the woman answered, her eyes scanning the horizon. "But we need to act now, before the aliens get any closer." A moment of silence passed between them. Then Leela spoke, her voice firm. "Lead the way." The woman didn't hesitate, turning swiftly and beckoning for Leela to follow. The two of them moved through the wreckage, their feet sure and steady despite the carnage surrounding them. As they navigated the fallen city, Leela's thoughts raced. These survivors, these wielders of fire, they had to be more than just warriors. They needed to be a symbol of hope, a message that the fight for Earth wasn't over. They made their way toward the outskirts of the ruined city, where a hidden underground network of survivors had taken root. There, in the dark recesses beneath the earth, a small group had gathered, each of them bearing the mark of the flame, their eyes filled with determination. The moment Leela stepped into the dimly lit chamber, several pairs of eyes locked onto her. They knew who she was. She was the face of resistance, the legend whispered in the darkest corners of the shattered world. The Heralds of Fire, they called them. Leela took a deep breath, her flames flickering in response to the tension in the air. "You all have the fire?" she asked, her voice echoing in the quiet room. One of them, a tall man with deep-set eyes and a weary expression, nodded. "We do. We were waiting for someone to lead us. Someone like you." Leela's heart thundered in her chest. These weren't just survivors, they were warriors. And they weren't waiting for a savior. They were waiting for the spark to ignite the revolution. A roar from above shook the ground, and the sound of alien ships descending flooded the chamber. Leela's heart skipped. They were here. "We don't have much time," the man continued, his voice grim. "The aliens have learned about us. We need to act now, or we'll all be dead before we get the chance to fight back." Leela nodded, her flames burning brighter as she made her decision. There was no more hesitation. "We fight." The room erupted with a chorus of agreement, the air crackling with the promise of destruction. As Leela raised her hand, the fire inside her surged, ready to burn away the alien scourge that threatened to wipe humanity from existence. These survivors were not just a last hope. They were humanity's future. The Heralds of Fire had united, and the flames of rebellion were about to spread. The underground chamber was alive with urgency. The Heralds, now fully aware of their combined power, gathered in preparation. The room hummed with anticipation, the air thick with the raw energy of the flames they could control. Leela stood at the center, her molten blade crackling in the dim light, her mind racing with the weight of what was to come. "Ready yourselves," Leela commanded, her voice cutting through the tension. "We fight not just for survival, but for the future of Earth. Today, we remind the galaxy who humanity really is." A chorus of agreement rose from the group. The tall man with the weary expression stepped forward, his face set with grim determination. "We're not just fighting for Earth. We're fighting for everyone. Word has spread. We've had reports of other species resisting the alien empire because of us. We've become a symbol, Lila." Leela clenched her fists, flames flickering from her fingertips. "Then we'll burn that symbol into the minds of our enemies," she said. "No one will ever forget the Heralds of Fire." Outside, the distant hum of alien ships grew louder, signaling the imminent assault. The time for preparation was over. The Heralds moved swiftly, forming a battle line beneath the ruined skyline. Lila took her position at the forefront, flanked by the woman who had first found her, and the tall man who seemed to exude an aura of quiet power. They were joined by others, each wielding their own fire, each empowered in a way that felt almost divine. There was one who could summon firestorms with a single thought, the flames roaring like the very fury of nature itself. Another could turn her body into living fire, her skin rippling with heat as she took on the form of a massive inferno. There was even a young man, barely out of his teens, whose power manifested as beams of pure fire, piercing through the dark skies with pinpoint accuracy. But despite the power they wielded, Leela could sense their fear. The alien forces were relentless, and their weapons were unlike anything humanity had ever faced. Still, there was something undeniable in the air, an energy that bound them together. They were united in purpose, united by the fire that now lived within them. Leela turned to face her newfound army, her expression fierce. "This is the moment," she said, her voice rising with each word. "We show them that humanity is not to be forgotten, not to be wiped out. We are fire, and fire never dies." As if in response, the ground shook, and a roar split the air. The alien ships were upon them, their massive forms casting shadows that darkened the sky. Hundreds of war machines descended, their weapons already primed for destruction. Leela felt the fire stir within her, a pulse of heat that surged to the surface. Without a second thought, she raised her hands, and the fire responded, leaping from her fingertips in a blazing arc that cleaved through the first wave of alien soldiers. Her heart thundered with each pulse of flame, and as she unleashed wave after wave of fiery destruction, she realized just how much power had been unlocked within her. The fire no longer felt like a weapon. It felt like an extension of her very soul. The others followed suit, the sky igniting with blasts of fire as they took the fight to the aliens. The flames roared as if alive, answering their commands with brutal precision. The alien forces, unprepared for the sheer ferocity of the attack, faltered for a moment. But the battle was far from over. From the ranks of the alien invaders, a massive warship descended, its hull lined with weapons of unimaginable destruction. It hovered just above the battlefield, releasing a squadron of heavily armed soldiers in powered exoskeletons. These were the elite, special forces trained to face the impossible, and they would not be swayed by the flames. Leela saw them descending and felt the familiar surge of dread. These were the beings who had wiped out entire cities with ease. They were the aliens' answer to the Heralds of Fire. "Hold the line," Leela shouted, her voice carrying over the chaos. "We burn them down, no mercy." The Heralds surged forward, a wave of fire and fury, but the elite alien soldiers were ready. The air crackled with energy as they returned fire, unleashing a barrage of plasma blasts that lit up the battlefield in a blinding flare. Leela narrowly dodged a blast, feeling the heat of it sear the air around her. She retaliated instantly, summoning a torrent of flame that engulfed the nearest soldiers. Their bodies were incinerated in an instant, but more kept coming. Her heart pounded, and she pushed herself harder, the fire within her fueling her movements. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for every soul left on Earth. For the future. The alien warship above them loomed, its weapons primed. It fired, and a beam of energy sliced through the air, aimed directly at Leela. Without thinking, she thrust both hands forward, and a wall of flame erupted, meeting the beam with a deafening crash. The fire surged in a violent storm, absorbing the energy and redirecting it back toward the ship. The vessel rocked violently, smoke and sparks flying from its hull as the beam was deflected. Leela's heart raced as she realized they could win this fight. The fire was their weapon, their strength, their promise of a future. But there was still so much more to do. Push them back, she screamed, rallying her warriors. We fight till the last flame. The heralds charged forward, their flames brighter and fiercer than ever before. The firestorm had only just begun. The battlefield had become a sea of fire. Every inch of the shattered city seemed to be ablaze, with the heralds of fire cutting through the alien forces like a tidal wave of molten fury. The crackle of flame and the thundering crash of explosions filled the air as humanity's last stand unfolded in the heart of a dying world. Leela stood at the center of it all, her body humming with the power of the flames that surged through her. Her molten blade had become an extension of herself, cutting through the alien soldiers with lethal precision, each swing sending a wave of destruction in every direction. The heat of her power felt intoxicating, but it was also a heavy burden. She knew they couldn't keep this up forever. The alien forces were vast, and their war machines relentless. The elite alien soldiers had proved to be formidable opponents, their exoskeletons heavily reinforced, and their weapons capable of tearing through human armor like paper. Yet, the heralds of fire had not faltered. They fought with a ferocity that the aliens could not comprehend, their flames tearing through the ranks of the invaders with such force that the air itself seemed to burn with every strike. Leela's breath came in ragged gasps as she parried a strike from one of the alien soldiers. The alien's plasma blade clashed against her flame-wrought sword, sending sparks scattering in all directions. She ducked under his next attack, spinning low and sweeping her blade through his armor with a burst of fiery energy. The soldier's body disintegrated into ash in an instant, but as the flames of battle raged on, Leela saw something that made her blood run cold. From the alien warship, a new wave of assault troops descended, armored in a dark, iridescent material that seemed to absorb the very light around them. They were massive, taller than any human, their movements precise and unnerving. They moved with mechanical efficiency, as if they were not soldiers, but something else, something far darker. Leela's heart sank as she realized what they were. Voidbringers, the tall man, who had introduced himself as Jace, hissed beside her. His face was twisted in both fear and hatred. The aliens' shock troops. Nothing can stop them. Not fire, not bullets, nothing. The Voidbringers were known throughout the galaxy for their invulnerability, their dark armor made from the rarest of materials, able to withstand any weapon. They were the terror of any battlefield, feared by even the bravest warriors. And now, they were here, on Earth. Leela's pulse quickened. She felt the fire within her surge, but doubt flickered in the back of her mind. Could even their flames stand against the Voidbringers? As if sensing her hesitation, Jace placed a hand on her shoulder. Don't let them get in your head. We fought too long and too hard. We fight together. Leela nodded, drawing a deep breath. She had no time to doubt. The alien war machine was relentless, and if the heralds fell now, there would be nothing left. We need to hit them hard, she said, her voice steady despite the storm raging around her. We can't wait for them to break through. We push forward, together. The heralds rallied behind her, forming a tight line. The Voidbringers were advancing, their heavy steps reverberating through the rubble-strewn streets. Leela raised her hand, her fingers flicking as she summoned a tidal wave of fire, pouring all her energy into the flame that erupted from her palms. The fire roared as it hurtled toward the Voidbringers, a scorching inferno that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. The Voidbringers didn't flinch. They didn't even slow their advance. Instead, they raised their weapons, dark, jagged blades that hummed with a malevolent energy and cut through the fire as if it were nothing more than smoke. The flames splintered against their armor, unable to penetrate the dark, impenetrable surface. Leela's heart skipped. She had never encountered anything like this before. Her fire wasn't enough. But she wasn't alone. From behind her, she heard the voices of the other heralds rallying together. The fire they summoned didn't just belong to one. It was the power of all of them, a unified force that could not be ignored. As one, they struck out at the Voidbringers, their flames swirling together in a tidal wave of destruction. The Voidbringers met the attack head-on, but this time, their armor seemed to crack. The sheer intensity of the Heralds' combined power was too much to contain. The ground beneath them trembled as waves of fire slammed into the invaders with devastating force, the heat rising to a blistering intensity. A massive explosion rocked the battlefield, sending shockwaves through the ruins. Leela stood firm, her body almost glowing with the heat of the flames. She could feel the fire within her, swelling, merging with the others. This was not just her battle. It was theirs. And together, they were something more than human. The first Voidbringer fell, its dark armor charred and shattered. It collapsed to the ground in a heap of molten metal. But the others did not retreat. They simply advanced, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. Leela's resolve hardened. If fire couldn't stop them, then they would burn everything until there was nothing left to fight for but victory. "Keep fighting," she shouted. "They will fall. We will win this." The firestorm surged once more, and the heralds of fire pushed forward, unstoppable, into the heart of the inferno. The air was thick with the acrid scent of burning metal and charred flesh. The battlefield had turned into a hellscape, with jagged ruins serving as a grim reminder of what humanity had lost. Yet, amid the destruction, the heralds of fire pressed on, their flames never faltering. Leela could feel the heat of the fire rising inside her, each heartbeat sensing with the rhythmic pulse of her flames. It was as though the fire had become a part of her soul, and she knew, in her bones, that she was no longer just human. She was a force of nature. The Voidbringers were relentless. They had fallen back, but only momentarily, regrouping beneath the looming shadow of the alien warship. Their dark, impervious armor seemed to absorb the fire with ease, but each attack, each blast, left them slightly less invulnerable, more fractured. Leela knew that they could be beaten. They had to be. "Stay focused," she yelled to the others, her voice cutting through the chaos. "We break their line." Now, the heralds surged forward in unison, their flames igniting the very earth beneath their feet. The Voidbringers met them head-on, their towering figures looming like nightmares. The clash of weapons rang out, each blow from the Voidbringers sending shockwaves through the air. But the heralds held their ground, their fire glowing brighter, fiercer, with each passing second. Leela swung her molten sword, cleaving through the air with deadly precision. The flames that cascaded from her blade tore into the armor of one of the Voidbringers, creating cracks in its dark surface. It howled in fury, raising its jagged blade to strike her down. But before it could land the blow, another herald, a woman with silver blonde hair and a smoldering fury in her eyes, flanked the creature, sending a fireball into its chest. The explosion sent the Voidbringer crashing to the ground in a heap of scorched armor. "Good work, Kira," Leela shouted as she swiftly moved to take on another Voidbringer, her sword held high. "We can't let up," Kira replied, her voice strained with exhaustion. "There's more coming." Leela's heart raced as she saw the new wave of alien reinforcements descending from the warship above. These were not Voidbringers, but instead a legion of alien soldiers, smaller, but no less dangerous. They flooded the battlefield, their plasma rifles crackling with deadly energy. The heralds had taken down the first wave, but now the real test began. Would their flames be enough to push back an entire invasion? Leela could feel the pressure mounting. She could see the weariness in the eyes of the other heralds. their flames flickering with fatigue. She had to act quickly. They couldn't afford to lose momentum. "Everyone, gather," Leela called out, her voice cutting through the smoke and chaos. "We need to unleash everything we have, or we won't survive this." The heralds gathered in a circle, their flames swirling around them like a living inferno. Leela closed her eyes, focusing all her energy on the fire that now resided deep within her. She felt its heat rise within her chest, the power coursing through her veins like molten lava. The flames danced around her fingers, responding to her thoughts as if they were an extension of her very will. Together, the heralds raised their hands toward the sky, summoning the full force of their fire. The air around them seemed to vibrate with the intensity of their collective power, a storm of fire swirling into a massive column that reached toward the heavens. It was a blaze unlike anything the aliens had ever seen, a firestorm that could incinerate everything in its path. Leela's voice rang out as she gave the command. Now, with a collective roar, the heralds unleashed their fury. The fire erupted from them like a wave, a torrent of flame that surged toward the approaching alien forces. The soldiers, unprepared for the raw intensity of the attack, were engulfed instantly. Their cries were drowned out by the deafening roar of the flames as they consumed the invaders. The ground beneath them cracked and buckled, unable to withstand the heat of the inferno that surged through the battlefield. The Voidbringers stood their ground, their dark armor glowing with the intensity of the fire. They raised their weapons, deflecting the flames, but even they could not withstand the sheer power of the heralds' unified attack. One by one, they were thrown back by the force of the fire, their armor cracking and breaking under the relentless onslaught. Leela pushed herself harder, her flames burning brighter, reaching higher, until she felt as though she were one with the fire itself. She could feel the heat licking at the edges of her consciousness, the fire threatening to consume her. But she held on, focused on the singular goal, victory. And then, in a blinding explosion of light and heat, the first wave of alien soldiers fell. The battlefield fell silent, save for the crackling of the flames as they began to die down. Leela stood, panting, her body covered in sweat and ash, her flames still flickering at the edges of her fingertips. The heralds gathered around her, their faces covered in soot, their eyes filled with a mix of exhaustion and triumph. "We did it," Kira said, her voice hoarse. "We stopped them." For a moment, Leela allowed herself to believe it. They had won, this battle, at least. But she knew that the fight was far from over. The alien warship loomed overhead, still a terrifying presence in the sky. And even though the battlefield was littered with the remnants of the alien forces, Leela knew there was more to come. "We've only just begun," she said, her voice low and steady. "They won't stop, but neither will we." The heralds of fire stood tall, their flames still burning, their hearts fueled by the knowledge that this fight, this war, was far from over. They had set the world aflame. And now, they would make sure it stayed that way until victory was theirs. The victory was bittersweet, though the alien forces had been repelled, at least for the moment. The war was far from over. Layla stood amidst the wreckage, her molten sword still glowing faintly in her hand. The battlefield, now quiet except for the crackling remnants of fire, painted a stark image of humanity's survival, scared but not broken. Her team was exhausted, but the determination in their eyes was unyielding. They had tasted victory, and with it came the realization that they were more than mere survivors. The heralds of fire were a force that the alien invaders could no longer ignore. "Let's move," Leela commanded, her voice steady as she surveyed the smoking remains of the alien war machines. "This battle won't last long. We need to strike before they regroup." As they moved through the ruins of the city, the weight of what they had accomplished began to settle on Layla's shoulders. The heralds had fought bravely, but they weren't invincible. They had lost good people already, and the toll of their powers was beginning to show. Flames flickered from their fingertips, weaker now, their energy slowly depleting. The fire within them was endless, but their bodies weren't. "We're all running on fumes," Jace, the tall man who had been with Leela from the beginning, said quietly, his voice heavy with concern. "We need to rest. If we keep pushing like this, we're going to burn out." Leela's jaw tightened, but she couldn't deny the truth of his words. The fire inside them was a gift, but it was also a burden. It consumed them, and it would take everything they had if they didn't find a way to pace themselves. "We'll rest when the job is done," Leela said, her voice resolute. "We've got one chance to hit the aliens where it hurts, and we can't let it slip away." The others nodded, though their exhaustion was palpable. They moved through the shattered streets, heading for the heart of the city. The alien warship still hovered above them, an ominous presence that threatened to overshadow their fleeting victory. They needed to act before it called for reinforcements. They couldn't afford to wait for the enemy to regroup and come back stronger. The path was treacherous, littered with alien corpses and the remnants of their war machines. The destruction was staggering, but it was a testament to the power of the Heralds. They had turned the tide, but it had come at a steep price. As they reached the heart of the city, a deep rumble shook the ground beneath them. The warship above them began to lower, its massive engines roaring to life as it prepared to strike. Lila's heart pounded as she looked up, the realization dawning on her. They were preparing for their final push. "We need to destroy that ship," she said, her voice fierce. "Now." Jace gave her a sharp look. "It's not just a ship, Layla. It's a fortress. We won't be able to take it down with just fire." Leela's mind raced, the fire within her pulsing with a wild energy that mirrored her thoughts. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and on the brink of exhaustion. Yet the fire was still with them. It was their weapon, their strength, their only hope. "We don't need to take it down completely," Leela said, her mind locking onto a plan. "We just need to disable it long enough to turn the tide. We hit their power core. It's our only shot." Kira, who had been unusually quiet, stepped forward, her eyes narrowing as she processed Lila's words. "The core is inside the ship, beneath its reinforced plating. Getting there won't be easy, but it's our best shot." Leela nodded, her determination unwavering. "We'll create a diversion. The rest of you get inside, find that core, and blow it. I'll hold the line." Jace looked at her, his expression a mixture of respect and concern. "You sure about this? That's suicide." Leela met his gaze. "We either do this, or we die waiting for them to wipe us out. It's the only way." The others exchanged grim looks, but no one hesitated. They were all in this together, and this was the only path left. With no time to waste, they spread out, positioning themselves around the warship as Leela took the lead, moving into the open to draw attention. The alien warship's engines roared as it descended, and Leela raised her arms, flames shooting from her fingertips to meet it. She let the fire explode outward, a wave of heat and fury that hammered against the ship's reinforced hull. The alien soldiers within the ship turned their weapons toward her, but she was already moving, her flames trailing behind her as she sprinted toward the base of the vessel. The alien forces began to move, their exoskeletons clanking against the metal ground as they advanced. But the Heralds were faster. They surged forward, a wave of fire and fury, splitting into smaller groups to target the weak points in the warship's armor. Leela focused on one objective: distraction. The rest of the Heralds would find the core and bring the ship to its knees. She turned, raising her hands once more to the sky, summoning a torrent of fire. The flames engulfed the warship's landing platform, forcing the alien soldiers to scatter as the ground beneath them buckled and cracked under the heat. But they were resilient, and they began to return fire, their plasma blasts streaking toward her. Leela barely dodged in time, the heat from the blasts searing past her skin, leaving her momentarily disoriented. She gritted her teeth, refusing to give in. Her mission was clear. She had to hold them off long enough for the others to reach the core. But as she looked around, she saw the numbers of alien soldiers growing. There was no turning back now. She could feel the fire within her, burning hotter than ever. The Heralds had begun their final charge. And this time, they would not stop until victory was theirs. Lila's mind raced as she leaped forward, her flames crashing against the advancing alien soldiers, sending them tumbling back. The alien warship loomed like a steel giant overhead, its engines continuing to hum with power as it prepared to release its full wrath. The enemy was vast, and the odds were against them. Yet there was no room for hesitation, no time for fear. The fire surged within her, pushing her forward, the heat threatening to consume everything in her path. The other heralds were already in motion, splitting off from Lila's position to carry out their part of the plan. Kira led a group toward the rear of the warship, flanking it with an intensity that would have overwhelmed any lesser force. Jace and the others coordinated their attacks, focusing on taking down the alien soldiers who had swarmed from the ship's lower decks. The sounds of battle filled the air, plasma bolts ricocheting off crumbled buildings, the roar of fire as it clashed with alien technology. Lila didn't look back. She focused on the task at hand, drawing the alien forces toward her and creating an opening for the others. She spun, her molten sword slicing through the air with a crackling hiss. The flames leaped from her blade, searing through the alien soldiers with deadly precision. Their bodies disintegrated in moments, reduced to ash as their exoskeletons cracked under the force of her attack. But they kept coming. There was no end to the alien forces. For every soldier she felled, two more appeared in their place. Their weapons fired relentlessly, the plasma beams streaking toward her, forcing her to dodge and weave. Sweat dripped from her brow as she pushed forward, her body screaming in protest, but her resolve was unyielding. She couldn't stop now, not when the mission was so close to success. She could hear the others fighting, shouting commands, urging each other on. Kira's fire tore through the alien ranks, but even her power was being tested. The energy reserves of the Heralds were rapidly depleting, and Lila knew they couldn't sustain this level of intensity for much longer. Lila, Kira's voice crackled through her comms, urgent. We're inside. We've reached the core. But we need more time. Hold them off, just a little longer. Lila's heart skipped. The core. They were so close. I've got you, she replied, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. Just get it done. Lila's flames flared as she turned her attention back to the advancing enemy. She planted her feet, taking a deep breath, and focused all her energy into one final desperate strike. The air around her crackled with heat as her fire swirled and expanded, growing into a massive storm of raw energy. It was dangerous. It was reckless. But it was all she had left. With a roar, she released the fire in one furious burst, the explosion of flames engulfing the aliens in a wall of searing heat. The shockwave sent soldiers flying, their armor melting as they were caught in the inferno. The ground trembled beneath her, the sky above lit up by the eruption. The blast sent a ripple through the alien forces, knocking them back and creating a temporary opening. Lila stood in the center of the destruction, her breath ragged, the fire around her flickering and fading as her energy drained. But it was enough. The warship began to tremble, its engines sputtering in response to the sudden surge of power from its core. Lila could feel the vibrations under her feet, the ominous hum of the ship's systems faltering. She knew the others had triggered the core's meltdown. The remaining alien soldiers hesitated, unsure of what was happening, their orders unclear in the wake of their leader's confusion. This was their moment. Lila's heart pounded as she called to the others. Now, finish it. In the distance, she saw Kira and the others emerging from the ship's underbelly, their faces determined, eyes burning with the same fierce will. They were heading straight for her, their mission accomplished. Lila took one last look at the warship, her eyes narrowed with focus. The core was destabilizing rapidly. The ship would collapse soon, but they needed to escape, quickly. The Heralds began to fall back, retreating to a safer distance. The alien forces, now disoriented and leaderless, were regrouping but still outnumbered. The firestorm they had unleashed had sent shockwaves through their ranks, and the realization that their warship was doomed seemed to have shattered their will to fight. But as the heralds pulled back, the warship's engines roared back to life, thrumming with an ominous energy. The core was unstable, and its volatile nature was about to unleash a cataclysmic explosion. The ship lurched, its systems screaming in protest, as if it were aware of its impending destruction. "We need to move faster." Jace's voice came through her comms, strained. "It's going to blow." Leela felt the heat rising as the ship's core reached critical mass. She turned to face her team, urgency pressing down on her. They had given everything to this battle. And now, they had to survive the price of their victory. With one final glance at the warship, Leela led the heralds toward the cover of the ruins. The ground shook beneath their feet as the warship's core reached its breaking point. The explosion was inevitable. It was only a matter of seconds. And then, with a deafening roar, the warship erupted. The shockwaves slammed into the heralds with bone-shattering force, sending them tumbling through the streets. Leela felt the heat sear through the air, her skin burning even as she shielded herself with what little energy she had left. The warship's collapse was a monumental explosion of light and sound, an apocalyptic blast that seemed to tear the very sky apart. The shockwave slammed into the city, leveling everything in its path. When the dust finally settled, Leela slowly pushed herself to her feet, her body battered but still standing. The alien warship was gone, reduced to a heap of molten wreckage. The heralds had won. This battle, this war. But the cost of victory had been immense. And the war was not over yet. The world was silent, save for the smoldering remnants of the alien warship and the distant crackle of fire. The city, once vibrant with life, was now a shadow of its former self, scared by the brutal conflict that had torn through it. The heralds stood in the aftermath, their bodies battered and bruised, their flames flickering low, but their resolve still unbroken. Leela felt the weight of the destruction around them, the toll of their battle, and yet there was an undeniable feeling of triumph. The warship, a towering symbol of the alien threat, was gone, its ashes scattering across the desolate landscape. The enemy had been defeated, at least for now, but their victory had come at a cost. The heralds were fewer in number, their strength diminished, their fire weakened by the relentless strain they had endured, but they had made it. They had turned the tide of the war. And now they were standing at the precipice of a new beginning. Leela surveyed the battlefield, her heart heavy with the loss of so many comrades, civilians, and the world they had fought so hard to protect. But in the quiet that followed the explosion, a flicker of hope sparked within her. The fight was far from over, but for the first time in a long while, they had a chance. They had won the impossible battle. They had proved that humanity was capable of defying the odds. "We did it," Kira said softly, her voice hoarse but filled with quiet satisfaction. Her silver-blonde hair, singed and matted with soot, still shimmered with the faintest glow of fire. She looked at Leela, her eyes filled with admiration and understanding. "We really did it." Leela nodded, though her gaze was far from triumphant. "We've come a long way. But this isn't over. We've only stopped one ship. The invasion is still happening, and more will come." Jace stepped up beside them, his tall frame leaning heavily on his weapon, exhaustion evident in his every movement. "What now?" he asked, his voice steady but weary. "We can't keep going like this. We need a plan." Leela paused, taking in the sight of her team, her family, standing with her at the edge of this broken world. They had given everything. They had sacrificed it all for humanity, for the future, but there was still so much to be done. She knew their battle was not just against the aliens. It was against the growing despair, the crushing weight of what they had lost, and the uncertain future that lay ahead. "We rebuild," she said, her voice firm. "We take this victory, and we turn it into something more. We gather the people, we inspire them. This war may have been a battle, but the war isn't over. And we will fight until every last invader is driven from our world. Her words carried through the air like the steady flicker of a flame. It was a promise, a vow that they would not be defeated. Not now, not ever. The Heralds had become something more than soldiers. They had become legends. Their fire had burned through the enemy's ranks, and now it would burn through the hearts of humanity. They were the symbol of resistance, the spark of hope in a world that had been consumed by darkness. As the sun began to set on the horizon, casting an orange glow over the ruins, Leela felt the weight of what was to come. There would be more battles, more losses, and more sacrifices. But as long as they had their fire, this fire that had been passed down from generation to generation, they would not stop. Humanity's warriors, the Heralds of Fire, had become myths. They had faced the impossible, and they had emerged victorious. But myths were not born from defeat. Myths were born from defiance, from resilience, from the fire that burned even in the darkest of times. Leela looked around at her team. Kira, Jace, the others, each of them had become a part of something larger than themselves. They were the flame that would light the way for humanity's future. They were the heralds of a new dawn, a new hope. And with that, they began to walk toward the future, together. As the stars began to twinkle in the sky above, Leela knew this was just the beginning. The fire within them would never die.